Well, hi everybody. Welcome back. Marvin Seipel here with Clearwater Historical Society Museum. We are joined today by Captain Kai Lewis of the Daisy Mae fame. Goes back three generations of charter captain in Clearwater.
Yes.
Three generations.
Yeah.
So we'll get started here. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, Captain Kai.
Well, thank you, sir. Thanks. Yeah, well, my dad's side of the family came from Philadelphia and all, and then at one point he was kind of all over the place. He had a dude ranch out in the Tetons and this and that, and he ended up with a boat called the Ramona here in front of the auditorium.
About when was that?
It was in the late 30s.
Okay.
And he was running the boat by himself and all. And my grandfather, which was to be my grandfather, came down and chartered a boat with my mom, his daughter, and everything. And they actually fell in love, and they got married, and she started mating for him. I got pictures of him with tarpon hanging up, you know, the big thing back then. But that was in, in like 39 or 40, I guess, 1939 or 1940. It was one of the first charter boats in Clearwater.
So rather than hire a crew, you just marry them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyhow, they fell madly in love, and one thing and another. And I'll never forget them telling me, they said, I said, well, what were you getting for an all-day charter at the time? And she said, well, we're getting $15 a day. And this is for an inboard V8 engine and a 34-foot wooden boat built here by one of our boat builders. And I said, well, that's pretty good. I said, man, that's, kind of low pay. I can tell you when I started out. But anyhow, she said, yeah, we got a $5 tip one time. And Dad and I went out to the park restaurant on Clearwater Beach. We partied all weekend on it.
On a $5 bill.
On a $5 bill plus the $15.
You couldn't get parked for an hour out there now for that.
No. But at that time, it was, lots of stories there about, what was there, the Seashell Hotel and that, and the old marina out there and everything. And then Dad went on, and they took him into the Navy and everything, and then he became port manager in Guam for the Navy and everything. And then when he came back from there, after I was born in 1942, then they made him port manager at Tampa. He was port manager over there for several years. But when I started out, we were kids in Bel Air. I mean, there was our first house. We actually lived over off of Lincoln and all over near the Clearwater Country Club at one time. And we had a house on Clearwater Beach, but I can't tell you what the address was. It was one of the old Spanish ones where it narrows down over there. Mm-hmm. But then we mainly grew up there in 1336 Indian Rocks Road, which is the first two-story if you leave the four-way stop there at the country club over there. And growing up there, there was no other houses around us. A lot of the roads in Bel Air were dirt. And being kids back then, we used to go over to Bel Air Beach. Well, we'd have to drive all the way down to Madeira Beach, and then we'd get in the car. Once you got to Bel Air Beach, the road would end, and it was all dirt. And I remember as a kid, young little whippersnapper and everything, my brothers were all over and all. And we'd go out there, and everywhere you looked, there was 50 caliber machine gun shells by the thousand, the brass things from the airplanes. Was that something that you've heard about much at all?
Mm-hmm. Many times. And was that still called Dan's Island at that point in time?
No, we called that part Bel Air Beach.
Okay.
And on
the north end.
Yeah, we called Dan's Island.
Okay. What's now Sand Key and Sand Key Park and Sheraton.
Yeah, but we'd pick up those 50 caliber, and we had a lot of bombs, unexploded bombs, and we'd bring them back, and shoot, we didn't know as kids we'd throw those bombs. We didn't throw them at each other. We'd throw them in the yard and all. Now they put on hazmat suits and clear the whole neighborhood, if they find one of but that was going up there and everything. And then Bel Air, I mean, the Parkers and several of the families been around for years and everything were there. He was one of the biggest builders around, and the kids and all would go around and get free wood to build huts and one thing and another around the neighborhood. And we had our favorite place called the Waterfall down there, where you have the Biltmore on your right, and then you go down toward the waterfront and you go over that bridge, and that was the waterfall.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And we spent hours and hours and hours down there. I'll never forget how we got behind the waterfall one time, and we found a lot of snakes down there, but I got behind the waterfall where it was coming over, and it was all clay and real slippery. And I don't know if they were water snakes or moccasin to this day, but they were all 4 feet long, and about 15 or 20 of them came up between me and the guys in the middle of it. And my heart was pounding, and the only thing I could do was run, and I said, if it's slippery, I'll fall in. So I got back over this way, and I kind of ran toward this wall, and I did slip, and my foot went in the water, but I got to the other side, and they pulled me out and everything. But all those snakes were there. And then as kids would further on up, the banks, are real high, and they had vines and everything. We'd run off those, we call them cliffs, we'd run off those cliffs and land on the vines down there.
That's about a 60-foot elevation. I believe
it was high.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that part of the coast, that's the highest coastal elevation on the west coast of Florida.
Yeah.
That section right there along the Bayview or
Yeah,
Bluff.
video back then, you'd have seen all those kids running off that thing and landing on vines. And we'd kind of walk in from down below, and it was not user friendly. There was a lot of moccasins, a lot of snakes, and a lot of this and that and everything. But,
A wide, very, very wild area back then,
yeah.
before the
Yeah.
development. So you went to Southward here, correct? You went to the
did.
school.
Yep. I went to school here, and then I went to junior high out there off Greenwood, and then in the 8th grade, my mom and dad, I was an afterthought, so I kind of really screwed up their life. They both had kids, and here I come along. My mom was 40-something. So they decided they sent me to Admiral Farragut in the 8th grade.
You're a troublemaker, huh?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't really a troublemaker yet.
Oh.
It hadn't gotten there too much yet. But so I went to Admiral Farragut 8th, 9th, 10th, then halfway through the 11th grade, and then I got kicked out. So, and then I got to come back to Clearwater High School, where there were some females and everything. Now there's females in Admiral Farragut, but it was not bad for me. But a lot of times all the other the boys would get to go home, and mom and dad, they were off gallivanting around the country or something, so I'd stay there on the weekends. So, from here to Clearwater was only a half-an-hour drive, but I survived that. And we divided up a laundry. That's all we did. My roommate's name was Miller. We got back Millar's Laundry, and so 3 of us just bought some T-shirts and sheets and all, and they kicked us all out for stealing. But now they didn't do it anymore. And the first 2 boys, mom and dad, came, and it was not user friendly. And I thought, boy, my dad kind of a ruffian. Here comes my mom in the station wagon, gets out with a cast on her leg and said, "Come on, honey, you can come home. You can start Clearwater High School after Christmas. You don't need to start yet." So on and so forth. Got home. Dad said, "Yeah, no problem, son. We'll start out."
So after, when did you graduate from Clearwater High?
1960.
Okay, so 1960.
Yeah.
And what did you do when you got out of high school? At that point in time, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
Dad had boats. He bought a 34-foot custom-built wooden boat in St. Pete in 1953 when we bought that. And then we made several trips up to Philadelphia, where he was from and all, and rode out a hurricane and that thing on the way back. But we had all our family on my dad's side was up in Pennsylvania and all. So we made several trips on that, and I got to where I loved to fish. And we made boats, actually made a boat when we were 8, 9 years old out of plywood from a couple of houses that
I did the same thing, cobble something together with
Yeah.
construction
shelving material.
construction debris, or may or may not. What's the statute of limitations? There may or may not have been a couple of sheets of plywood that were
Yeah.
not yet on the roof that may have been diverted.
Well, it was funny because the plywood, the shelving stuff, and all that was missing was the friends of the family that used to babysit me. So when they were missing stuff, they just tell Dad, oh, well, Kai and Dad Parker and all them, they just borrowed it to build a hut or make a boat or something. But, yeah, so.
So you built the first boat out of
shelving material.
acquired materials.
Yes. Yeah. And they bought a little three horse Buccaneer for me for Christmas one time, and I put that on. But growing up with a hideaway over at Clearwater Marina, then we had a little dinghy. It was canvas over real pretty mahogany built dinghy, and it was probably weighed 150, 200 pounds. And I'll never forget, I had a little 1.5 horse engine that would run up toward the Island Estates and all. It was all mangroves then, and the one hermit out there, we all kids knew him.
What was his name?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Everyone talks about the hermit, but nobody knew his name.
Yeah.
He was just a hermit.
Yeah, but he was a nice man. And then me and Billy Graham and Dave Spalding and all that group, used to fish down there and everything. And then we did a lot of fishing back then as kids. Would ride our bikes down to where the bridge was. And when we got down there, what is that, my old engine?
This
It's Dave Spalding.
this was given to us by Dave Spalding.
Okay. Yeah, he told me that he gave me that.
That is the very first engine of the what's now the Queen Fleet. So
I got
technically,
Mine was a 1.5 horse, and David was in his boat next to me, and I was in mine. And I'll never forget going under the bridge, and I could go about 300 feet, and the engine would quit, and I'd drift back 250, and then I'd get it again, so I gained about 50 feet every
Each
time
time.
I would go. And I didn't do much fishing then. We did more fishing just off the seawall, down where where Dad had his boat and the seafeeder was at.
Mhm.
And we'd ride our bikes from Bel Air, and we'd fish there, and we'd catch hundreds of redfish. Back then, they were all little guys, but we thought they were really doing something. And then alongside the causeway on the north side, we had the big, wash tubs, and we'd fill up those with scallops from the north side of the causeway in an hour, just out there walking barefoot, picking up scallops. And that was pretty neat when we were kids.
so from that point, at what point in time did you decide that you were gonna make a go of it, make a career?
Well, after that, Dad sold the hideaway at some point, and then I had one of the first Stamus boats that was built. It was a 16-foot wooden boat, and we had a 35 Devonrid on it, and that was one of the first ones of them too. And played with that and everything, and then Dad bought a Chris Craft sea skiff, 26-foot Chris Craft sea skiff, and we had it over at Island Yacht Harbor. And we started playing and fishing more than that, and I decided, I should go ahead and get my license. So I had a real bad automobile accident when I was 19, and I went to St. Pete JC, and then I worked construction, built Dearborn Towers over there. A good friend of the family was the head builder on that, and I was then labor foreman, and hoist operator and all. And then I had my bad old ducks, and I rolled a TDNG out on Gulf to Bay. And I got my head caught in between the windshield and the palm tree, or windshield and the curb, and it was right where the oyster bar was. And they took me to Morton Plant, and they said there's nothing we can do for him, just take him to the morgue. And a friend of mine was actually driving the ambulance, and they took me back I was in the hospital for like 2.5 months, and I still had 3 eardrums put in my eye, messed up my eye, I was cross-eyed, wore a patch for 3.5 years, got that straightened out. But I've been thinking about that all my life. So I couldn't do anything for a year, and then I got back from that, and I said, well, you know, I'm going to go get my license, start running Dad's boat, which I did. And I just missed getting my unlimited ocean operator's license by about a week. So I got a 6-passenger is what I ended up with, which then I bought the first Daisy Mae, which was a 34-foot custom built boat in Tarpon Springs. And there was a gentleman named Jake Court that he had one leg. He was a hell of a skipper and all. And so I started running that and everything right there in Clearwater. And then Neil Wingo, my good friend,